for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Another term you may hear to describe these substances is entheogens. The word entheogen is derived from Greek roots and can be translated to mean creating the divine within. Entheogenic experience has been used by indigenous people for millennia for healing, knowledge, creativity, and spiritual connection, using tools such as breath, meditation, chanting, and various plants, fungi, roots, and organic extracts. This term is used to shift how we understand these practices, plants, fungi, and compounds. Since the passing of the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, the natural right for humans to have a relationship with entheogens has been criminalized in the United States. While the support for decriminalizing and legalizing psychedelics is growing, there's also growing support for ending the war on drugs completely. According to a nationwide poll by the ACLU and the Drug Policy Alliance, 80% of Americans agree that the war on drugs has failed. What the war on drugs has succeeded in, however, is destroying communities, claiming the lives and freedom of countless millions of people around the world. It has been a war on Black and brown bodies, a war on impoverished people, and a war on consciousness. In the past few years, psychedelics have once again emerged in the mainstream news as a popular subject. The therapeutic potential for psychedelics is now being recognized as a powerful tool for addressing what is commonly known as a mental health crisis. There is increasing recognition for the potential of psychedelics to help us treat depression, PTSD, anxiety, substance use disorder, other psychological illnesses. Performance enhancement, improving wellness, and spiritual growth with psychedelics are also becoming popular topics. The research and anecdotal data showing the incredible efficacy of psychedelics is a beacon of hope for so many. For these reasons, medical access with psychedelics, as well as decriminalization to protect personal choice, communal use, and community-based healing outside of a medical framework are both crucial pieces of the puzzle in making sure that people have the safety and support they need to navigate their own relationship with psychedelics. Only in community can truly safe, equitable, responsible stewardship of natural plants and fungi be created. The psychedelic movement has the opportunity to address this holistically and with compassion. And so there must be solidarity between the psychedelic movement and the larger movement to end the drug war. And so with that, I pass it to my co-moderator, Nathan Gates.
Thank you, Jean. And thanks to everybody who's worked so hard on this. And thank you, Representative Ford, for your support. My name is Nathan Gates. I'm a licensed psychotherapist in private practice, a 20-year advocate for psychedelic policy reform, and a cattle farmer in rural West Central Illinois. I'm going to talk a little bit about the timing of this bill and why now is a good time for its introduction. There's been a great deal of activity on this front in the last 2 years. Over a year ago, Oregon made history and became the first state to pass major psychedelic drug reform into law, doing so by a popular vote of its citizens. The people of Oregon chose to end criminal penalties for personal amounts of drugs generally, and specifically create a process to allow for legal administration of psilocybin services within 2 years. Since then, California, New York, Missouri, Michigan, and Washington State have proposed versions of their own psychedelic reform bills. Psychedelics are a very hot topic. In various contexts, psychedelics have become prevalent in discussions of mental health. Last year alone, more than $2 billion were invested in various companies and startups involved in psychedelic pharmaceutical development, service provision, and training for psychedelic facilitators. Additionally, in our academic institutions, the science of psychedelics is growing in a very big way. Major research centers have sprung up in the last few years in London, New York, Austin, Berkeley, and just north of us in Madison. Psychedelics are helping neuroscientists better study the brain. Basic science is developing regarding the impact of psychedelics on human psychology and the processes of change. And clinical research into psilocybin is in the third phase of a 3-phase FDA approval process, which, if successful, would make a version of psilocybin available medicine. In fact, psilocybin was recently granted breakthrough therapy status by the FDA due to the strong results of the initial trials. With all of these developments underway, why must Illinois act now? First, as can't be mentioned enough, the drug war is a major source of injustice. It's failed by any measure. The best time to begin to unwind the monstrous Controlled Substances Act was 1970. The second best time is now. Psychedelic drugs, while not without risk, do not present the same dangers as legal drugs such as tobacco or alcohol, or even socially acceptable non-drug activities such as horseback riding or motocross. In terms of risk, there's not a reasonable argument to be made that psychedelic drugs should be against the law. In terms of individual autonomy, the case is clear that psychedelic prohibition should end. Second, we must not let Prohibition 1.0 lead to Prohibition 2.0. By this, I mean that we must not let prohibition by legal coercion become prohibition by corporate coercion. As I mentioned, there are currently billions being spent on determining the future of psychedelic drugs, and much of that is being spent with the intention of abusing the US patent process in order to choke access to only proprietary, overpriced compounds, rather than the safe and effective natural plants and fungi that currently exist widely. Preemptive and justly ending prohibition of psychedelic plants and fungi ensures that whatever innovations corporate scientists make will be valued on their own merits and won't represent an unethical appropriation of what are fundamentally public goods. Third and finally, we are in dire need for creative and new solutions to our crises of mental health and social dysfunction, both of which have been amplified by the harrowing pandemic we're all experiencing. This bill allows for individuals to exercise choice regarding how to encounter psychedelic medicines. They may safely purchase psilocybin and use it in a manner of their own choosing. They may also use it in a safe and supervised setting with trained and experienced facilitators. They may do so for reasons of personal growth or for treatment of a mental health condition. In the event that a person seeks treatment for a psychological challenge, they'll be able to choose to work with a facilitator who is also credentialed as a mental health professional. There are many challenges to face as we begin the process of unwinding our failed and disastrous policy of prohibition. As we do so, we must place autonomy and justice front and center. We must ensure that all people have access to high quality, unbiased information about substances so that they may make their own truly informed decisions. We must make sure that people have safe options for how they obtain and use the preferred substance without coercing them into unnecessarily expensive or restrictive settings that they don't want. We must ensure that those who wish for support can receive it safely and with care that is informed by the best scientific evidence. This bill, the Illinois Compassionate Use of Natural Plants and Fungi Act, is a tremendous step in the right direction. The intention of this act is to decriminalize the possession, use, cultivation, production, creation, analysis, giving away, and delivery of natural plants and fungi. Additionally, this act will establish the Illinois Psilocybin Advisory Board to advise the Department of Public Health regarding the provision of psilocybin and psilocybin services. The act will establish licensing categories for psilocybin service centers, service facilitators, manufacturers, and testing facilities. Organizations in support of this bill so far are the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, the Sana Healing Collective, the Illinois Psychedelic Society, Drug Users Health Collective of Chicago, the Psychedelic Safety and Support and Integration of Chicago, and Balanced Veterans. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jean.
Thank you so much. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, we have Representative LaShawn Ford. Representative Ford was first elected to represent the people of the 8th District of Illinois in 2006 and has seized the opportunity to work hard on issues important to his constituents and all citizens of Illinois. Increasing social justice and addressing disparities are common themes in his work in areas such as jobs, education, health, drug policy, small business development, and housing and veterans affairs. Ford takes seriously his vow to uphold the Constitution of the state of Illinois. Representative Ford, if you'd like to just take a few moments and share with us about this bill, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I tell you, this is the right team to be on. When I hear Nathan and Jean, you guys say things like the war on drugs failed, justice, equality, ending bias. I mean, that's the type of language I like to hear. So thank you all for putting this together. And I want to thank my good friend, Mark, who is very motivated by this work. So how you doing, Mark? And I want to thank all of you for being here today. I don't have any kind of grand announcement to make, but I can't help but feel that we're taking an important first step today as we talk about our intentions and our expectations for the process. I do want to let you know that a group of dedicated and knowledgeable advocates have been working on a draft of what we're informally calling the Illinois Compassionate Use of Natural Plants and Fungi Act. We finally have something on paper, and we want to solicit input as widely as we can before we introduce a bill. And of course, I'll be remiss if I didn't call out Jean Lacy, the Jean Lacy right here that we see, for a special thank you. She has spent an enormous amount of time to identify and pull together some real experts. And I think in the field to work with us on this bill. We started with what we call the Oregon referendum language. You heard Nathan, I think, talk about that. And then over a period of conversation, Jean and her team worked their magic to get us to this point. So thank you for all that work. But now that I've praised Eugene, I want to encourage everyone to provide feedback tonight. Tell us what you like and what you don't like, and how we can do it better. Not even the name of this bill is sacred. This is the beginning of a dialogue and a process, and I want to make sure everyone's voice is heard. Those who know me know that I am an advocate for mental health resources in our communities. You know that I support harm reduction and drug treatment rather than jail. I believe that many people use substances medically, whether they choose to label it themselves, patient or not. And I am, in fact, the chief sponsor of legislation creating safe consumption sites here in Illinois. So my position is pretty clear. And at the same time, this is not my first rodeo, as you know, Jean. And I know what it'll take to pass a bill. I know that everyone, from the people who want to see free mushrooms to be handed out on every street corner, to the people who want them totally banned and offenders jailed, and everyone in between, will pop up as soon as a bill is introduced. I know that we will hear from people who want to grow whatever they want to give away, whatever. I know we will also hear from companies who have patents already pending, and everyone in between. So I want to hear from everyone. Tell us what's reasonable, what's fair, and we will work together to strike the right balance between a perfect bill that will never pass and a horrible bill that's not worthy of passing. The process of healing is different for everyone. I believe what this legislation is to do is to help create a new natural product to promote mental and physical healing. And let's face it, we can all use a little healing these days. I look forward to doing my part to help heal our communities and the people that we love. So I look forward to listening. That's one of the best parts about being a legislator. You get to listen to experts like you.
Thank you so much, Representative Ford. Thank you for your kind words and for really just being willing to work with us all on something that's so important to all of us for so many different reasons. So I'm going to introduce the rest of our panelists just quickly, and then I'm going to go around and start asking a few questions so we can draw some of the more nitty-gritty information out. Um, we have Vilmarie Fraguada Narloch. Vilmarie is a licensed clinical psychologist in Chicago, Illinois, and a harm reductionist working to end the war on drugs. She received a certificate in psychedelic therapies and research from the California Institute of Integral Studies in 2018 and is the current director of drug education at SSDP. She is the co-founder and director of Sana Healing Collective, a Chicago-based nonprofit organization committed to individualized client-led approaches, promoting the well-being of the whole person and community with a focus on psychedelic-assisted therapies. We have Sam Chapman. Sam is the executive director for the Healing Advocacy Fund, a nonprofit organization supporting the implementation of Measure 109 in Oregon with education and advocacy. Sam has over a decade of experience in advocating for progressive drug policy reforms at the local, state, and national level. He served as the campaign manager for Measure 109 in Oregon, the law that legalized the first ever psilocybin therapy program in the United States. Thank you for being here, Sam. And we have Mark Peysakovich. Mark is the managing partner of MBM Advantage LLC, a firm that provides legislative and public affairs consulting, as well as community outreach, alliance building, and business development services to a diverse set of clients in sectors ranging from cannabis to construction to healthcare and human services. Mark has 30 years of public affairs, community engagement, and management experience, having previously held a variety of leadership positions in public health and human services sector. Thank you for being here, Mark. So I'm going to start with Sam. If you could briefly walk us through Oregon Measure 109, kind of the process you guys went through to get that established. And if you would also, in that section, touch a little bit on Measure 110, just to compare the processes here in Illinois.
Sure, you bet. And I am having some spotty Wi-Fi. I'll say an apology. So please wave at me or text me if I'm not coming through clearly. But I'll go ahead and dive right in here. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. Just dive right into Measure 109, what it did, what it doesn't do, and kind of how we got there. So I'll go ahead and just dive in here. Measure 109 established a framework within the Oregon Health Authority that will allow trained practitioners to administer psilocybin services at specially licensed centers. It also establishes, just like the proposed bill that was just mentioned, the Psilocybin Advisory Board appointed by the governor, and imposes a 2-year development period, which we are more than halfway through now here in Oregon before initial licenses are granted. It requires the establishment of training and licensure system for psilocybin facilitators, manufacturers, and testing labs, and requires the establishment of a tracking system for psilocybin products. Just as important as what it does do, these are some of the things that Measure 109 does not allow. It does not allow retail sales. There is no off-site consumption or possession of psilocybin. There's going to be very limited, if any, branding or advertising of psilocybin products themselves. Services will be allowed to be advertised, but not products. You're not going to drive down the highway and see any billboards for mushrooms anytime soon in Oregon. The psilocybin therapy centers cannot be near schools, I should say cannot, and there will be no access for minors. This is the psilocybin services modality, which is a 3-step process. The first is preparation session. I'm sure many of folks may be familiar with this 3-step process. An informed consent process will be initiated with health and safety warnings and screenings. We're currently in the process of developing different categories that people might fit into in terms of you're generally well off, you don't have any current health history background that folks need to know about, to maybe you're on a certain type of medication. And while that medication does not have any adverse effects with psilocybin, it might be a good idea to build a safety plan in general just to ensure that continue to elevate safety for the participants, and other types of mental health reviews and goodness of fit assessment to really help match participants with facilitators. There's going to be a wide variety of facilitators with different experiences, all of which have to go through about a 160-hour training course that's going to be developed for facilitators. But at the end of the day, the relationship between the participant and the facilitator is going to be incredibly important for positive outcomes. So that's all in the preparation stage. The second aspect here is the session itself. Again, this must occur at the psilocybin service center. The facilitator must remain present throughout the entire process, and the facilitator must certify the completion of the session itself. And last, but certainly not least, is integration session, which must be offered by a facilitator after the completion of an administration session. While, of course, one session is highly recommended, we envision many integration sessions being offered by facilitators as well. We know there's lots of really good research coming out showing the more prep work and more integration work that you can do before and after a psilocybin session, the more the positive benefits can continue to last over time. So moving into some of the campaign lessons for implementation. These are essentially the 4-5 core educational questions that we sought to answer for the general public. The first, what is psilocybin, right? When we did our polling, we really learned a lot about how people really had no idea what psilocybin was in a really big way. If they did know, it was a stigma. They tried in college, it was drug war, propaganda type stuff. People really didn't know. And so here in Oregon, we started from scratch. And so we needed to define what psilocybin was. Secondly, we highlighted the research. We talked about the FDA, studies, the clinical studies, the fact that psilocybin therapy had been shown to really be a promising option for people with depression and additional folks who are suffering from mental health struggles. And we really highlighted that to show, that despite psilocybin being a Schedule I drug, that scheduling was a political statement, not a medical one. And we really believe that continuing to show that hypocrisy allows people to move past a lot of the drug war propaganda that has been purported by the federal government for so long. And we really feel that that was an essential way to combat the question of, well, this is federally illegal. We really showed people the emerging science from a clinical side of things. And that helped a lot of folks soften their initial reaction, which was a negative one, to a positive one. Third, what does the measure do? What does it not do? Again, we just went over that. It was really important, especially in a state that has legalized cannabis, for people to understand that this is not a retail model. And that there are going to be a lot of safeguards and guardrails around this, and really striking the right balance of safety and access remains one of our top priorities here in Oregon as we implement this program. And last, but certainly not least, who stands to benefit from having access to psilocybin therapy? When we're really able to combine the facts and the science with the narratives, the stories of people from all different types of communities, BIPOC community, LGBTQA community that often has been traumatized from the current medical community, to folks of low income backgrounds, first responders, et cetera, making it relatable to people that they know, to be able to really allow them to step into their shoes and understand that we all know someone who stands to benefit from having access to psilocybin therapy. That was a core part of our strategy of really pulling on the heartstrings of voters to help them understand that someone they know likely stands to benefit from having access to psilocybin therapy. So these are a couple of just as examples of some of our spokespeople, which are really important messengers for the campaign. This was Dr. Janice Knox, who is an MD for a very, very long time. She was a great spokesperson for the campaign. This is some of the polling that we had here. As you can see, early on in October, our polling wasn't that great. In fact, it went down. Right around August, September is when we actually started doing our TV ad buys, our marketing of the campaign, and really pushing our message. And as you can see, as we continued to educate the public in the final months of the campaign, we garnered upwards of 56%, which for the first time a state had ever introduced this type of concept, 56% is not something to sneeze at. It's a real number, and it's a big signal of, I think, the support to come from other states. So here's a breakdown of what drove yes voters. As you can see, as I just mentioned, the science and the research. hands down, is something that people really needed to hear as a backstop to really be able to understand how they or people they might know could benefit from psilocybin therapy. As you can see, folks suffering from common mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, this number probably will continue to go up, especially with COVID. Here in Oregon, we unfortunately rank somewhere between 49th and 50th in funding and access to mental health treatment. And that number has only compounded. And so I think that, with COVID and everything else going on, we had a huge wildfire season a couple of years ago that displaced a whole lot of people in Oregon, lifting up the current mental health crisis in America and within your state and within your community is definitely a strategy I would recommend that you really look into to leverage. Again, not that psilocybin or psychedelics in general is a panacea. It's not. There are plenty of things out there that work for people today, but there's a lot of people that are falling through the cracks of our current system that deserve more options. And we believe that psilocybin therapy and psychedelic therapy can stand to be one of those big tools moving forward. So again, this is the CEO and a close friend of mine, Cameron Witten, who established a Black Resilience Fund. Cameron, the possibilities for healing in a very personal way. And he had a lot of family actually that he is very excited to provide access to for psilocybin therapy. Let's get forward to the 3 keys to successful implementation. The first is affordability. None of this matters if no one can afford it, right? And to be honest, we are several years out from mainstream insurance providers being able to cover this. It's the honest truth. We are working on setting that table. But in the meantime, we have to be realistic about how we're going to provide financial resources for people who are suffering that stand to benefit the most of this program. And I think that's a really big task that we are working on tackling now. The second is just accessibility in general, right? I think one of the things that often folks aren't talking about or thinking about at all is geographical access. Often we see this a lot in cannabis, cities and counties develop their own rules and regulations. They opt out, right? That is a single issue bottleneck that stands to happen, and why it's really important that once you pass a law or even before passing it, recognizing where those bottlenecks can be, not just at the state level, but at the local level too, is incredibly important, especially for rural communities that may stand to benefit in a different way than urban communities, and that they may not have access to general healthcare overall at all. And so being able to provide this as a new tool for rural communities is also of incredible importance. And last, but certainly not least, is equitable access. For folks who have been around the block a couple of times in drug policy, we missed the boat in a really big way with cannabis. There's a lot of amazing work that's being done to catch up to that. And I continue to applaud everyone who's doing that. I know there's a ton of people that are doing a lot of good work, SSDP, MCBA, et cetera, DPA, so many good organizations doing that work. We have an opportunity now here in Oregon and with new states coming online within psilocybin and psychedelic access to really acknowledge the missed opportunities that we had for cannabis and to get them right out of the gate now. That is easier said than done. Again, striking that right balance between safety and access and equitable access has arguably never been done within the existing models, but it's the challenge that we have in front of us. And I believe personally, it's a righteous one. That's one of the reasons why we gave ourselves 2 years to figure this program out here in Oregon, is that we realize the responsibility of getting this right and making sure that we can continue to defend and expand it really depends on ensuring that we have affordable, equitable access for all who stand to benefit. Let's skip over the psilocybin advisory board. Here's our timeline. Again, as you can see here, we are well into 2022. We've started to see some of the first draft rules come out from the Oregon Health Authority around training and products. There's going to be several more rounds of those draft rules. But with that, I'm going to stop talking because I'm sure there are plenty of really good questions and other panelists that want to share as well. So I hand it back over to you, Gene.
Thank you very much, Sam. Very, very much appreciate your experience in Oregon. We've been, as we were working on our Illinois law, took a lot of inspiration from, took a first draft from Oregon, and also have learned a lot from your process in the last year. kind of watching what you guys have gone through and hash things out. And to emphasize for our audience that the bill that Illinois that we have so far is not a carbon copy of Oregon. There are going to be some differences from what Sam described as his law and ours. One of the reasons for that, of course, is that we don't have a ballot initiative process. So this is being done legislatively. And I wanted to ask Representative Ford for our next question. What's the current political landscape for drug policy in Illinois? And what opposition do we face as we bring this through the General Assembly?
Well, this is a good time to talk about drug policy. Even it's a bipartisan idea now. And so that's a really good place to be in, because Republicans and Democrats are both thinking about reimagining drug policy. The challenge would be educating individuals on a new idea. And that's always the challenge. And so the more we're able to educate individuals and dispel myths, the better off we'll be.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna ask this to Vilmarie. What is the basis for including broader decriminalization measures in a bill like this? And the second part of that is, how do we ensure this bill doesn't deepen inequities and social divides?
So the first piece of that question, what the basis for decrim in this bill is, frankly, people are already using these substances in Illinois. And we want to ensure that we're honoring that and protecting those folks and not alienating them. We expect that there's possibly going to be continued underground facilitated psilocybin use or other sort of adult or recreational use of psilocybin and these other substances. And, so for people who want to consider this as an option for addressing their mental health needs, they'll also now have a regulated program where they can access these services, right? Some folks might prefer to seek such services, within the safeguards of this program. And for those who have other needs or otherwise are using these substances, we recognize that the war on drugs and prohibition doesn't work to curtail any of that use. So decriminalizing is the option that we're going for to add on to the services component of the bill. And there's a lot of ways that we can ensure equity. One of the ways is, certainly the regulatory board, the advisory board, giving recommendations that would, point to that, right? So things like how the services and the licenses will be regulated. Right? There's some components that are already in place in the language, and otherwise, want people who believe in and understand equity and understand harm reduction to be the folks on that advisory board. So that we can take that in the right direction. I will say that once I found out that it was Rep. Ford that was sponsoring this bill, I breathed a sigh of relief, right? Because having had the privilege to work on multiple bills now that Ford has sponsored, organizing other town halls for those issues, I know and understand, his as the representative, his dedication to the people directly impacted by the war on drugs. And I know he believes in equity, believes in harm reduction. He actually listens to the people on the ground doing the work, people with lived experience. And so I expect nothing less on this issue. And I trust that, we'll be able to work with him on equity in these really important ways. Some of the things we've done that you may have seen in other legislation, other bills, other conversations around psychedelic policy is intentionally not including peyote in as one of the plants. And there's a few reasons for that. Primarily, it's just honoring the wishes of the Native folks. And I have some resources that I can share here. Don't have time to go into that, and I certainly don't speak for those communities, but hopefully folks will find that information useful and enlightening. Other pieces, again, is ensuring that the advisory board is representative of the people of Illinois, that it includes people with lived experience with these substances, as well as a health equity expert, which is part of the sort of the list of folks that would be included in that advisory board. One of the additions that we've put in the language is including a master's level clinician, master's level therapist on the advisory board. So it isn't only like doctoral level professionals. The reality is most of the people providing mental health services here are master's level counselors and therapists. So wanting to ensure that voice is heard. One of the board duties also, and one way that we've sort of shifted some of this language to be sort of forward thinking, is to consider that for the board to consider and make recommendations about decriminalizing other drugs. So that will be another piece of their duties. And there's a lot of other pieces there. We've addressed some of the age limits, dropping it down to 18 versus 21. Which of course is very important for us as SSDPers and the youth in this movement. Training of the facilitators, we've added a couple components there to ensure for proper care for individuals receiving these services. One of the pieces that is useful that I think this came from Measure 109 as well, is that it doesn't require anyone to be diagnosed with a particular medical condition to be considered for psilocybin services. One of the limitations of the research is there's a lot of sort of, very small number of people, very particular situations that is considered in the research, that is included in the research. And so by not alienating folks with maybe other conditions that can be helped by this medicine, we're kind of addressing some of those pieces. There's just a whole lot of other things. There's actually a few really interesting things that have been coming out of Oregon. There's another piece of legislation that they're considering all around ensuring equity in their bill, in their program. And those are a lot of the same things that I was thinking of, to ensure that people have easier access to psilocybin services. So recognizing and exploring the barriers that people of color are facing and starting the businesses and getting training, in license fees and all of that stuff. So just kind of like removing those barriers and ensuring that everyone at every level of this program, whether you're a client or a service facility operator, can have easier access to this work. And there's a ton of different things that we can do. And I'm certainly interested in hearing other ideas from the attendees here as well.
Thank you, Vilmarie. Really have worked hard on this bill, I think, all of us, to ensure that we empower people with as many options to make safe choices as possible. Next question I have is for Mark. Mark, would you briefly walk us through the process and timeline of passing a bill like this in Illinois?
Sure, I would be happy to do that. And certainly I'd actually defer to the actual legislator. So correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Representative Ford. Generally speaking, the legislative session we have in Illinois starts in January, ends in May. Generally, the bill would be introduced in January, and the hearing process would begin. If this is a bill that's introduced by Representative Ford, it'll be introduced in the House. It'll go to the House Rules Committee, which will assign it to a substantive committee. It could be the Health Committee. It could be, I don't know, health licensing. You don't know, or insurance, or executive. You don't necessarily know where they're going to put it. And, obviously advocates would want to work to the sponsor, with the sponsor as one of the first steps to try to get the bill into a favorable committee where you think members are most likely to pass the bill to the floor. Once the committee votes and the bill passes to the floor, there is generally within a few weeks, a floor vote. And so let's say if you introduced a bill in January, it will pass committee, let's hope, by February, March. March, April, it goes to the other house of the legislature, where it also has to pass through a committee, first be assigned to a committee, then pass the committee. And then it would have to pass with the entire House with a vote of the legislature. After that, so by that time, you generally get it into May, and hopefully it gets through both houses by the session adjournment at the end of May. And then once the bill gets passed, it goes to the governor, where the governor can sign it, which we hope he will do, mandatorily veto it, which means send it back to the legislature with recommended changes, or veto it outright because he disagrees with it. Obviously, when you have votes in the Senate and the House, you want to run up the totals as much as you can so that it looks like veto-proof majorities. That way, the governor sort of has an indication that the bill is so popular with legislators that if he vetoes it, he risks sort of a rebellion of his veto being overridden. Generally, governors make that decision in July, August. Bills, a lot of bills, particularly controversial bills where the governor wants to sort of hold it and mull, will be signed, sort of within 2 to 3 months. So probably in August, and when it becomes law would be contingent on what it says in the bill. Some bills are effective immediately, other bills are effective at the beginning of next year. If there are questions about details, I'd actually, defer to Representative Ford.
He did good. He did great. I'm just a Bill. You did great.
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you. Just to give people a general understanding of what that process looks like, in case they forgot the Schoolhouse Rock song that we all had to memorize. So I wanted to share this a little bit earlier, but I will ask now if we can share the fact sheet for this particular act. And then as we just kind of let people look at that, I am going to ask another question. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ask a question of Representative Ford, and this is specific to Illinois. What can we learn from the Illinois cannabis regulation process and improve upon when looking to regulate these other substances like psychedelics?
Oh, we do have, and you worked on it. So there's a lot when we talk about equity. And I think that's the center of our goal should be equity driven. So that's number one. Second, we should definitely make sure that people are safe with the implementation of the new law. Those are front and center, and making sure, I think you've gone over it, access, making sure that we are fair with the access to the plant. So those are key, and a serious campaign on awareness and understanding about the product. Marijuana, is more widely known than this plant. So I think we should definitely teach more. We didn't have to teach as much about the flower as much as I think we might want to do here. But I think the governor and the legislature and advocates recognize that we have an opportunity to get this right in Illinois. Anytime you get a second bite at the apple, you have to do it right. And this is that opportunity as it relates to making sure that we have some real equity in the process and not turn it over to big business.
Thank you, Representative. And I love your point about high quality information. And I think as we have this real advantage right now where so much research is happening right now that we're going to be able to share, with people as this unfolds. And I think people have a right to good, high quality information. And I also wanted to say to our audience too, as we're going on, if you have questions, we'll have a question and answer bit at the end, and there's a little button at the bottom, Q&A, and if you want to put questions in there, we'll have a few minutes at the end that we can ask questions. So if questions come up as our panelists are speaking, you can put them right there. And Vilmarie, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the challenges making psychedelics, such as psilocybin in particular on this bill, widely available for clinical use? Like the question of access, digging a little deeper into that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost, prohibition, right? Just in general, is the reason for why we have any of the barriers that we have around this. As Sam pointed out, like they had to have an entire multi-tiered disinformation campaign to address the stigma and to address the misinformation that has been, wielded on us by prohibition. And so I feel like that is a major challenge in general, because that has led to barriers in research, that has led to barriers in access, and everything else. So I think that is going to be a primary thing that we'll be up against, just like Sam mentioned, and we'll certainly be I'll certainly be reaching out for some tips there, Sam, around just talking to people, just helping people understand why this makes sense in Illinois right now, and how it can be helping Illinoisans like themselves. As far as making it accessible, wanting to ensure that we have good quality product, there's all sorts of complications in doing that. Proper training of facilitators is a big one, and making sure that we do that really well. And again, there's limited research still. And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that this bill will not sort of put any limitations on what sort of conditions can be treated on this, so that we have more, it's not like there's only, you have to have depression to get psilocybin assisted therapy, but it'll be more widely accessible. And I think, some of the things, a couple of other pieces around licensing and, having a service center, for example, there's some language in there about limiting how many service centers any one individual can be involved in, right? So that we're not, as Rick Ford said, sort of giving up to only corporate financial success, but rather ensuring that we're spreading it around and making sure that there's availability for lots of people to be able to, go in on this as a business, as an opportunity to help other people in their communities.
Thank you so much. And to follow that up, I am going to ask Sam, what kind of programs are going to need to be developed as we implement something like this, specifically in Oregon where you're working, but then also how that translates to other states?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Two immediate things come up, and I'm not sure they fit your definition of programs, but they're certainly important. I'm gonna turn my camera off because my Wi-Fi is clearly failing me here. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oof.
We can still hear you, Sam.
Can you still hear us is now the question.
I
Or
think maybe, yeah, I think maybe we lost Sam. We can come back. I'd love to hear his answer to the question. But, you know, in the interest of, you know, keeping to move forward, I saw a comment in the chat I wanted to read really quickly because it echoed, you know, if the Representative LaShawn Ford can see this, I just wanted to say thank you for being here and being an advocate on the issue to help decriminalize psychedelic assisted therapy. I'm doing ketamine assisted therapy at the moment, and I'm incredibly grateful that I have this opportunity to have this alternative help. Oh, I lost my place here. But yeah, that's the kind of sentiment in the chat box. I wanted to share that. The next question I think I'd like to ask would be to the representative again. What can the legislator do to mediate potential issues that will arise with the implementation of psilocybin services?
What could we do to mitigate issues?
Potential issue, yes.
Yeah, we need to work with the agencies that will be responsible for implementing it. You know, we need to make sure that we work with the Department of Agriculture. We need to work with the Department of Revenue. We need to work with the agencies that's going to be charged with implementing the new act. That's the key. JCAR, we have to make sure we have our relationships with JCAR. But we have some experienced leaders on this panel, and they understand all the pitfalls from the Cannabis Act and other policies that they've written and been a part of. So I think we're in good shape moving forward when the time is right.
I actually want to follow that up, Representative Ford, with just like a tiny little question, because those of us who did go through the process and from the legislator end too of implementing cannabis, there has been a little bit of fatigue surrounding like the long battle that has been bringing those issues forth. So how, like, what can we do to, like, as we're bringing this forth to people who are just like, I don't even want to hear about drug policy, I'm so exhausted with the cannabis process, how can we kind of get them to come around to work with us on this?
Yeah, you know, I think Sam may have talked about making sure that we talk about it in a way that's meaningful to everyone. It's a plant that's necessary. If we can convince people that this plant is necessary and that it can help people, that it's going to live up to its name, the act's name, I think that's going to be our best approach. You know, just telling people that we want to legalize another form of a natural plant is not something that people want to hear. People really want to hear ways to help people. And if we can prove that this is a natural way to help people, I think people will listen. You know, we don't go in saying we want to legalize a drug. We want to make sure that we offer an opportunity to help people that need help.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'm really enjoying the comments. So I see one here that wants that's suggesting we nominate Vilmarie, the Minister of Mycelium for the state of Illinois. And you know, I kind of want to go. Rep Ford referenced you know, experts at getting this through, and I think moving to that, Mark, I wanted to hear about your experience, you know, with cannabis. What's similar, what's different, and what are some, you know, local government issues that may arise that you foresee that you that will need to be worked with?
Well, I do think we learned a lot from cannabis, and when we were working on cannabis, we were sort of looking at the closest thing that we had, which was liquor, which didn't always translate one-to-one, but certainly had some similarities. And now we're going to be looking at cannabis as we start working on psychedelics. And so part of the question of, sort of for us as we work on this legislation is how much control should a local municipality to have to regulate a service center that we contemplate in this legislation. So I think there is going to be some tension between sort of what the state mandates and what the municipalities are going to be able to regulate, and we have to get that right. And certainly, I think that defined the cannabis debate, and this is, maybe just a little bit to get back to what Jean asked before about, about cannabis licensing fatigue and what that does. And I would say the one thing that we absolutely have to do every step of the way is ask one question: how can we make sure this doesn't end up getting litigated? Okay, making sure this does not end up in the courts, either because of licensing issues or larger substance legalization issues, or commercialization issues, making sure that whatever is done is implementable enough that we cannot and should not expect to get sued. One of the things that I used to work for a very large public health organization, and we talked about prevention a lot, and I tell people that prevention is just as important in legislation as it is in health. And so here we want to sort of anticipate some of the problems that might come up and try to resolve them in the legislation, rather than just saying, oh, well, everywhere pot's been legalized, there have been tie-ups because of lawsuits. I don't think we can do that this time around, and have to be much more purposeful in what we do.
Thank you, Mark. That's perfect. Yeah, just with respect to time here, I am going to flip to a couple of these really great questions that are in the Q&A box. This one we can address pretty quickly. My question is we are going to decrim these substances for healing and are acknowledging the war on drugs failed and harmed disenfranchised communities. How are we going to how are we going to handle past criminal case issues due to these substances? To that point, Jacob, agreed. This draft that we have does include language for expungement of past offenses. That was a big issue in the cannabis space. So those of us coming from there right out of the gate said, we want to make sure if there's any decriminalization on the table, we want expungement right in hand with it. And then the next part of Jacob's question, I'm going to put this one to Vilmarie. Yeah. Also, what about decriminalizing other drugs that have damaged vulnerable communities much more, such as the current opiate epidemic that Illinois faces? Are there any plans to decriminalize all drugs in the future?
Thanks for your question, Jake. I mean, if I had it my way, that'd be in here too. But there's definitely some finagling to do here, right? So one of the things that is included in the language of this bill is for the advisory board to review any other drugs that are currently not legal and make recommendations on as to, what are we going to do with those? So ideally, decriminalization. In addition, those of you who aren't aware, Students for Sensible Drug Policy does have a model resolution, to support sensible drug policy. That is a local municipal level resolution that we have going on like in 11 different communities, including Chicago, Illinois. We're getting that started here quite soon. So there are ways that each and every one of you can get involved in decriminalizing drugs right in your community directly. So that is definitely a huge part of the work that we want to be doing, and that we hope to be doing in Chicago and Illinois more broadly.
That's a perfect answer. Thank you. Let's see. I think we just touched on two here. It says, there's a couple different questions on about like how to get involved in the process and how to follow along with this bill. Get involved in our organizations. Students for Sensible Drug Policy is a global organization with chapters and efforts all across the map, and they do a lot of work here in Illinois. The Illinois Psychedelic Society, we host educational events and build community and are actively working on this effort. So please join us. Please donate to our organizations. A lot of this is a labor of love, so that we encourage you to support our efforts financially as well. And sign up for our newsletters, stay in communication with us, follow us on social media. Those are all really great ways to keep up with this specific process. And as we keep going forward, there will be more and more information put out. And I think we should reiterate at this point that this bill is not actually introduced yet to the legislator. So right now, we are hoping that you'll reach out to us. We're hoping that stakeholders and people interested in this process are going to come to us now and provide their input and expertise on this. So yeah, stay in touch.
Yeah, and Jen, I think also if they follow the websites and share any social media posts, help your social media posts go viral. That way we could have one voice. Everyone might want to create their own, but I think if we could share the post that you guys put out, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I was going to mention, I saw a comment or a question in the Q&A, regarding what the training would facilitate for facilitators would be. And I can just answer that really quickly, which is essentially that we don't know. That's going to be determined by the board, by the process. That's something that's going to be decided. We'll be, following Oregon. We'll be looking a lot at the scientific research that's coming through, and the exact clinical forms it takes will be sort of determined by the board. The language specifically isn't, in this bill, and won't be. That'll be, determined by a process. I think that also Sam is available by voice. I think I saw that in the chat box. I kind of want to get back to him because it's such a opportunity to hear from Oregon and what you're doing out there. And I kind of wanted to understand, we want to avoid some of the pitfalls, and I follow it pretty closely. I know that there's been a real flashpoint there around microdosing, because that's something that you don't do in a supervised session. And so I wonder, if direct sales would be a way to avoid that, or what your thoughts on are how to avoid that, and any other flashpoints that you or any other problems that you think we can avoid that Oregon's running into.
Yeah, for sure. Can you hear me okay, Nathan? Am I coming through all right?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Apologies for the technical difficulties here. Really quickly on microdosing, I'm going to share what is possibly a very unpopular opinion, but it's my opinion. I'm going to share it anyways. Measure 109 was not built for microdosing. That doesn't mean that it's not theoretically possible, but in being the first state that passed this, our focus is really on meeting therapeutic demand. And that's not to say that microdosing doesn't have a place in that model. But we just felt very strongly that in order to pass the law, we needed to take a narrow scope. And I think while there are many states that are continuing to move forward at faster speeds than I think we saw cannabis in a big way, and that's exciting, we still need to be careful about keeping the scope somewhat narrow if we want to keep putting W's on the board to build a foundation to build on top of moving forward. So I think there's a place for microdosing, but given the fact that you can't leave the center until you've been certified that you're no longer under the influence of psilocybin, it's not a model in its current form that is a home run for microdosing. I think in the future it could be, but for right now, the focus is really on macro dose type sessions and building safeguards for that. In terms of missed opportunities within the legislation and current challenges that we're running into, I'll just lift it up again. Figuring out how to pay for people to have access to these services and to pay the licensees properly so they can run a business, right? That is not an easy balance to strike, right? I mean, mental health care workers, especially for the bill that you're considering, where it's slightly different from Oregon, we don't require any current mental health care license for people to have to become a facilitator. There's going to be about a 160-hour training program that no matter if you're an ER doctor or you've been doing 30 years of really good underground ceremonial work, you're going to go through the same training program. And so that's one of the big differences we have. And knowing that, there's going to be big hurdles with current licensees, right? I think Mark brought up a good point about potential lawsuit battles. That's not avoidable. That's going to happen. And I think the question is, how do you acknowledge that it's going to happen, and how can you build in safeguards for reducing the number of legal battles that happen? Conversing with your medical boards. If you're not doing it now, you should probably start. Who are the people that are going to be participating as facilitators? What are their concerns? Figuring out how to get those providers insurance to sign off on this, right? If those medical boards and those associations that have the legal authority and the political weight are not on board, you may not have any viable facilitators that are going to be ready to go, on top of the financial question. So the big question in my mind is, where's the money going to come from, not just to build the program, but to sustain it and make it successful? And then, I think the second question really comes back to access, and this is something we saw a specific piece of the Washington legislation. Washington State, unfortunately, their psilocybin bill just died, but there was a 2-sentence piece of their bill that we really wish we had in our bill, which was allowing for psilocybin services to be administered at the home of someone who is medically unable to travel to a service center. We're talking about palliative care and hospice. And that is a community that, felt very important, that we're trying to figure out ways to make up for the fact that we didn't have a 2-sentence fix for that community. And so again, there's so many other communities that are going to have all different types of unique and common access issues. And I think those are things that some of the number of things that we're considering, for future fixes, and really to continue to be humble about where we might have missed opportunities out of the gate. We still have a lot of work to do and a lot of opportunity through the rule process to fill some of those gaps, but time will tell. We've still got a lot of work in front of us over the next 9 months here.
Yeah, that was great, Sam. Thank you so much. It's we're all learning a lot from Oregon. I will say that I have sat in on so many of the advisory board meetings and the subcommittee meetings, and it's all just been so valuable in this process that we're going through here in Illinois, to hear both what the actual board is going through and also the public input has been incredible. So I, from an outsider's perspective, will commend you all for doing a good job at the transparency of your process and keeping it open to the public and allowing us to extract as much information as we can. I think it's really relevant. One of the other questions in this chat and I'm going to throw, it seems most appropriate for Representative Ford. How can we include funding for more mental health addiction services, mental health infrastructure and addiction services within a bill like this as we're decriminalizing more substances?
Yeah, I think Sam really hit it when he talked about getting the insurance industry on board. We have to make sure that it's covered by insurance, getting the private as well as Medicaid to support it. I don't see the state providing grants to allow for people to receive the treatments. I think that it has to be covered by insurance. That's what I think. It would seem, it seems to me that I don't know if it'll be down the same path as cannabis, you know, using the same method to have cannabis covered, you know, private pay. But the best way is to really get insurance companies on board.
Yeah, that's, I will tell you from the perspective of providers who are already providing psychedelic assisted therapy, this is already a major issue. The use of ketamine is completely legal in all 50 states when it's prescribed by a clinician, and it's an off-label use of that drug when we're using it in the context of psychedelic assisted therapy. So this is something that they already run into, if having to isolate out their services to only bill insurance for certain parts of it, but have the patient pay for the drug itself. So that is definitely something we're going to be looking at as we build these centers too.
Yeah, and like I said, we know that they're doctors, they're ready to sign their patients up now.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And the other end of that, being insured as a service center, is also a major issue, even for doctors' offices who are legitimate licensed clinicians, but providing off-label ketamine therapy. It's a struggle to get them insured just as a business. So these are some of the things that we're going to be facing too as we keep going forward with expanding into other psychedelics. I mentioned at the beginning, MDMA is going to be legal in those same clinics next year. This is something that's actually coming on a federal level. And a lot of these same service centers are going to be implementing psilocybin too. So yeah, great point. Thank you guys for bringing that up. I'm going to try to get one more good question in here. Vilmarie, would you like to touch on the training requirements quickly?
Yeah, just to clarify. So while the advisory board will be making further recommendations about training, what sort of program, what sorts of things, there is some language in there of just sort of like what the baseline things around training should include. So the language sort of reads like facilitation skills that are affirming, non-judgmental, non-directive, trauma-informed, rooted in informed consent, training that teaches about having appropriate boundaries, about sort of the heightened transference and expanded states of consciousness that happen on this medicine, and other sort of social precautions related to the use of touch, and ethics and crisis assessment, and other things that are maybe like a little bit different than what we would consider traditional talk therapy that you encounter in psilocybin or other psychedelic assisted therapies. So wanting to ensure that at the baseline, the training includes these really important components.
Thank you. One last, go ahead, Nate.
Oh, and I just, I wanted to thank you for correcting me on that. And I also wanted to just go to the point that was talked about before too, just as our thinking, creating this bill, and the cost and access is so important. And I just wanted to throw in, I think that's why we felt so strongly about including, among other reasons, decriminalization and even direct sales, like give a lot of options to people to safely meet their own needs, so that they don't have to be channeled through what is probably going to be an expensive process that some will be able to afford and some won't at first. And we'll work on solving that problem over time, but giving people high quality options that they can direct them, like that they can safely take their health into their own hands, I think is really important. And that's a large part of what this bill tries to do.
Mm-hmm. And then the last question I'm going to get again ask that you do your best, Representative Ford, with this last question here. In his State of the State address, Governor Pritzker announced that he will be appointing a chief behavioral health officer within his office. Are there discussions on ensuring that that person is a supporter and advocate for this effort, or I'll add any of the other, drug policy efforts that are forth right now?
That's a good question. I think that this may be the first, I don't know if the governor thought of that, but this is a good opportunity. That's why town halls are so important. So now I've learned something else that we have to bring to the table. So thanks for that question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, excellent. And then we do have time for this last one in the chat here. But I don't know that we have an answer for this. So maybe a couple different people can give us feedback here. It says, what stakeholder individuals groups are you hoping to recruit to join the cause? Who is your dream endorser?
Can I just speak to that?
Please.
I'm all of a sudden awake. I just wanted to add, and as you know, Gene, I help sort of plan this event. So this is something that I very much own and am, sort of saying to myself as much as anybody else. But one thing that I noticed is that the panel even today could have been more diverse, right? And I think we need to look at that. We need to learn from it, and we need to make sure that we reach out more broadly. And particularly, I don't think it's a matter of endorsement. I think it's a matter of collaboration. We need Black and brown voices in some substantial way. And that's going to be, something important that we need to figure out in other places where this kind of effort has been undertaken, who have been the Black and brown voices that come around the table. And how can we get them to the table? So that is probably my top question as I leave this session.
Thank you. That is an important one. So with that, I want to just, again, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Everybody who showed up as a participant, who tolerated our technical difficulties as we navigated this. Abundant gratitude to you, Representative Ford, for all of your hard work and representation on these issues. Gratitude to you, Vilmarie, to you, Nathan, to you, Mark, and to you, Sam. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, to the general public, get in touch with us directly. We want to hear from you. We're open to your feedback and support on this issue. Or if you don't support it, I'm open to hearing from you too. Reach out to me. Let's talk. Show up to more events. Go to our websites, ssdp.org, Illinois Psychedelic Society.org. We have more events going on this month and continually as we go. Make donations. The links have been shared in the chat box. Sign up for our newsletters and to stay involved in the process. Thanks again for being here, everybody.